Prime Minister stalked to Moscow. They're saying it was an accident during a routine training exercise.
Governments change. The lies stay the same.
What else do we know about the Yana syndicate?
Top-flight arms dealers headquartered in St. Petersburg. First outfit to restock the Iraqis during the Gulf War. The head man's unreliably described. No photographs. Woman. On the top. Is our only confirmed contact.
Do you care for a drink?
Thank you. Your predecessor kept some cognac in the top.
I prefer bourbon. Ice?
Yes.
We've pulled the files on anyone who might have had access or authority at 7 Hours. Top name on the list's no friend of yours, I understand.
Oromov. They made him a general.
He sees himself as the next Iron Man of Russia, which is why our political analysts rule him out. He doesn't fit the profile of a traitor.
Are these the same analysts who said the Goldeneye couldn't exist? Who said the helicopter posed no immediate threat and wasn't worth following?
You don't like me, Bond. You don't like my methods. You think I'm an accountant. A bean counter, more interested in my numbers than your instincts.
The thought had occurred to me.
Good. Because I think you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur. A relic of the Cold War. Whose boyish charms, though wasted on me, obviously appeal to that young woman I sent out to evaluate you.
Point taken.
Not quite 007. If you think for one moment I don't have the balls to send a man out to die, your instincts are dead wrong. I've no compunction about sending you to your death. But I won't do it on a whim, even with your cavalier attitude towards life. I want you to find Goldeneye, find who took it, what they plan to do with it, and stop it. And if you should come across Oromov, guilty or not, I don't want you running off on some kind of vendetta. Avenging Alec Trevelyan will not bring him back.
You didn't get him killed.
Neither did you. Don't make it personal. Bond? Come back alive.
And thusly, we are introduced to the new relationship between the new Bond and the new M. And that scene there is just one of just a few of many that would reframe Bond for a new age. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Shaken Not Heard. I'm Elliott Serrano. That there is my co-host, Dave Pinto. We are a couple of James Bond geeks who get together every week to talk about a James Bond movie, a James Bond comic, or, you know, sometimes we just decide to talk about things that could be Bond, might not be Bond, depends on your point of view. Last week, we talked all about The Rock and whether that was actually a Bond film or not. So if this is the first time you've watched Shaken Not Heard, we are just a fan cast, couple of guys. I'm really more of a casual Bond fan, whereas Dave is an uber Bond nerd. He educates me on a lot of the stuff about James Bond that I didn't know. And we've been watching all the films, starting with Dr. No, leading up to tonight's movie, Goldeneye, which has been... well, I remember when I saw Goldeneye for the first time in the theater, I remember all the fanfare surrounding it. I remember when they were talking about Pierce Brosnan finally playing Bond, a role that many folks say he was born to play. Did Goldeneye live up to its hype? Did it do what it was meant to do? So we're going to talk about that tonight. We also have a guest on tonight. We are going to have Jon Clarke from Caffeinated Comics joining us. He asked to be in on the Goldeneye discussion, so we're going to do that. But before we get into the all the talk about the film, I have a question for you, Dave. What you drinking tonight?
I am appropriately enough drinking something from the Shaken book called the Goldeneye, which is 1.5 ounces of Jamaican rum, and I used the Blackwell Jamaican rum that you got me a few weeks ago. 3/4 ounce of Aperol, 3/4 ounce of lime juice, 3/4 ounce of simple syrup, 3/4 ounce of pineapple juice, and a teaspoon of passion fruit syrup with a pineapple leaf for a garnish. It's really good. So every time I make one of these drinks, it almost never turns out looking the way it looks in the book. The book is
practice, yeah.
You also have to make if you go by the measurements in the recipes, you have to like triple the recipe to get the quantity in the glass the way they're pictured. Otherwise, you get like this little dinky drink. But this is good. Another difference from how it's presented in the book is, I think part of the reason it's called the Goldeneye is supposed to be more of like a golden color, which comes from the pineapple. But this, as you can see, is more of like a reddish, almost like an amber color. It's really good. It's just, it doesn't, visually, it's not consistent with what you see in the book.
It's kind of like when you see those pictures of McDonald's burgers.
In the commercials.
Get an actual McDonald's burger, and you're like, oh. There's that whole remember that movie Falling Down when Michael Douglas goes into the fast food place and he orders a breakfast sandwich and he looks at it as opposed to the picture up on the bill or on the menu board or whatever. We're being lied to, Dave. That's all I'm telling you.
I expect more of the Ian Fleming estate.
I would too. Tonight, I've got a little bit of a head cold going on right now. I don't know why. So I am not doing anything other than sucking on a cough drop and having a little bit of a 4-year-old whiskey.
Nice.
That'll be for this evening. I was going to make another drink with my limited edition James Bond Jamaican rum, and I realized that I saw my almost finished the bottle. I don't want it to end. So I'm holding off on that. All right. And as I said before, we do have a guest joining us tonight to talk about Goldeneye. Welcome to the show, our good friend, Jon Clarke. How you doing, John?
Hey, Elliott. Hey, Dave.
How's it going?
Doesn't watching a 1995 movie make you feel young again? Seeing Pierce Brosnan without gray in his hair.
I will say, okay, this is a funny thing because we did see No Time to Die already, folks. So, if you want to see our review of that particular episode, you have to go back a couple. You'll see it either on our Facebook page, facebook.com/shaken not heard. Sorry, Dave. Sorry, John. Yes. You can also find it on our Twitch channel, twitch.tv/shaken not heard, as well as on our YouTube channel. I'm sorry, I don't have a customized URL for YouTube. Just go to youtube.com and do a search for Shaken Not Heard. You'll find it under podcasts at 007. When we went to go see it, or actually at the Pickwick the first night, I'm sitting there with Dave's friend, his best buddy, and we started talking about Pierce Brosnan, and your friend Mike pretty much said that Pierce Brosnan was the worst Bond ever. I don't care what you say, whatever you talk about, Pierce Brosnan was the worst Bond ever, and I was like, dude, it's okay. You can be wrong. I mean, you can live in your own bubble of wrongness.
Yeah,
that's fine. In retrospect, as I look at all the Bonds, if there is going to be kind of a weak Bond, and I mean that in terms of how he really compares to the books, to how Ian Fleming pictured Bond. The weakest is really my favorite. That would be Roger Moore. Roger Moore doesn't quite reach that level as even Timothy Dalton. I don't even say even George Lazenby. So, having said all that, I'm going into Goldeneye thinking, oh boy, how is this one going to hold up? Because as we've been going through all these films, Dave, you're aware of it. John, you're aware of it. I've gone in thinking, having a certain preconception or memory of a film, and then it being like, that's not quite the way I remember it. In many cases, the movies didn't hold up as well, like Live and Let Die, which was my favorite Roger Moore James Bond film. Now that's been supplanted by Moonraker, which I expected to be really bad, cheesy, because I kept getting people hammering on me how bad Moonraker is. And then when I finally watched it, I'm like, actually, it's not that bad. I kind of liked it.
Yeah.
So with Dave's friend Mike saying in my ear, Pierce Brosnan is the worst Bond ever, I was going, okay, I'm gonna gird myself here because I'm expecting Brosnan to be really 90s bad. I didn't think it was that bad. Actually, there was a lot of stuff that was going on in Goldeneye that predated what happened in the Daniel Craig movies. And they didn't go as dark with Pierce because it seemed to me that they were doing a bit of a course correction from Timothy Dalton, in my opinion. They were going they wanted to do a little bit of the hard edge of Dalton, but bring back a little bit of the charm of the Roger Moore. Am I wrong in that observation? Do you guys see where I'm coming from on that?
No, I think you're right. And I think, as we talked about before, there was a point in time when Brosnan was going to be Roger Moore's, was his heir apparent, basically. And I think, and everything happened with Remington Steele, where he got stuck in that contract and he couldn't take on the role in 1987, which is when he was originally supposed to. So we got the Timothy Dalton years instead. And I think and I think one of the reasons people were tagging Brosnan as the obvious next choice for Bond is because he was sort of like a younger Roger Moore. He had that kind of suaveness and the charm, and I think if he had been Roger Moore's direct successor, the movies would have probably continued kind of in the same tone as the Roger Moore movies, not go as dark as they did, at least like with License to Kill with Timothy Dalton. The Bond movies are always written to the strengths of the actor playing Bond. That's why the Roger Moore movies go very campy and silly at times. The Dalton movies got very kind of grim and serious. And then we get a little bit of a lighter touch with Brosnan, and then it went back to being a lot more kind of hard-edged with Daniel Craig to an extent. So yeah, I think that was definitely, they knew that that was the kind of Bond that Brosnan would succeed at playing, like a lighter Bond, sort of a swinging somewhat in the opposite direction from what we got with Dalton. And that was definitely a deliberate choice to go in that direction in the 90s with his Bond.
Yeah, I think Brosnan was definitely because people had been waiting for him for so long. And as I said, it was 8 years between Brosnan being announced as Bond and Brosnan actually portraying Bond. So there was all of this buildup that I think with Goldeneye especially, they were like, let's have him do everything. Whereas Timothy Dalton, it was like, let's make him more realistic. Let's strip it down. With Brosnan, it was like, okay, we'll do the fights. We'll do the stunts. We'll do the gadgets. We'll do the tuxedos. We'll do the girls. We'll do the locations. Let's get everything you wanted to see Brosnan do as Bond in this one movie, which is a lot of the charm of it. It does have a kind of uncomfortable edge. This was one of my favorite Bond movies. And when it came out, it was my favorite Bond movie. And then because it was coming from the Roger Moore, I didn't even see License to Kill when it came out. The Living Daylights was like, it was okay. I'm sure you guys talked about this. License to Kill came out in one of the biggest summers ever in 1989. It was very easy to not go to Bond because you were going to Batman or Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
So I never got around to that until cable. But Goldeneye I was really excited to see, and it had been 6 years. It was the longest break that Bond had ever taken until now, when Daniel Craig just took a break from Daniel Craig to Daniel Craig.
Yeah, I think one of our past guests mentioned that this most recent break from Spectre to No Time to Die fell just like a couple months short. Yeah. But yeah, it's almost that exact length.
So it was the length of time it was away, and just the amount they rebooted it at a time when you didn't really reboot movies. Using Batman as an example, this is the same year that Val Kilmer becomes Batman, and they purposely left in nods to the earlier movies to tell you that, no, he's the Michael Keaton Batman. We're keeping that going. Yeah. And in this one, it's like, no, Bond is not Timothy Dalton. Bond is just Bond. And this is where I think the fan rumor comes along that James Bond is just a code name and there are other Bonds, because it is a reset button.
Yeah. Well, they even have the fact that the pre-credit sequence is set in like 1986 or 87, and then you do the time jump after the credits. So it's effectively like wiping out the Timothy Dalton era. And it's like
they go back in time to right after Roger Moore.
Yeah, like
that's how far back they go.
In the 80s, not that Timothy Dalton guy.
Yeah, yeah, it's almost like The Simpsons, where Marge and Homer are always 38, and then when they do flashbacks, they just keep changing things. Like it was the 70s, it was the 80s. Then they did this very weird episode where they were in college and Homer was in a grunge band, and I'm like, you can't stretch it this far.
Yeah. But they also always also imply that Grandpa Simpson was like an adult in like the 1950s.
Yes.
Like they never retcon his like time growing up, but Homer and Marge, they have to keep changing the time. Like
and Mr. Burns is 275 years old. But Bond always, he'll pay lip service to what's going on in the culture, but it's not something that reflects the culture. You know, they take the trendiest or the coolest action sequences and lay them in, but Bond lives in Bond's universe.
Well, speaking of the culture, as a scene that I showed when we opened, where you see Dame Judi Dench now cast as M. It's the new face of the Secret Intelligence Service, right? It's using algorithms and numbers to determine, threats around the world. It's something that still happens today. And you have the old school Bond, bumping heads with his new boss, where he believes you got to be out in the field. That's where things. And she gives him the line that, you're a dinosaur, a misogynistic relic of the Cold War. Yes, this movie would take place after the fall of the Soviet Union,
when we never had to worry about Russia ever again.
I'll be honest with you. I don't even think we should have been worrying so much about Russia then either. But we were making it such a big deal, and it was again just another way to drum up the old jingoistic patriotism. But that's for my political podcast.
And even that scene that you show, the conversation between Bond and M in M's office, that scene even has a little jab at the Timothy Dalton movies when M says, "I don't want you going on some personal vendetta," which is exactly what happened in the last movie. And I think Bond says something like, "Oh, that would never happen." It's like,
right.
Yeah.
But also alludes to the fact that it's, the same person. Bond has to go after the same person who he blames for the death of his his partner and like his brother in many senses, Sean Bean's character 006. Mm-hmm. But that wasn't even okay. If there was going to be a cringe moment in the movie, and I was expecting some cringy stuff, the one cringe moment, it wasn't the bit with M and Bond and her calling him a misogynistic, dinosaur. It was Moneypenny jabbing at Bond, saying that what he's saying could be construed as sexual harassment. Because they were doing their back and forth, their flirty. And you're like, wow, man, now you've pretty much kind of thrown a bucket of ice water. If you say Bond takes place in his own universe, true. But man, they decided to throw. I'm waiting for them to make a Me Too reference in the next Bond reboot, because that's really what it felt like. It was the whole. Well, now we're going to do a course correction on Bond. I mean, that ultimately isn't what happens. It seems like just like a sly aside to what was going on in the culture at the time. Because then Moneypenny and Bond keep flirting afterwards. It doesn't really matter. And I've never considered mean, correct me if I'm wrong, and I could be stepping in something here, but I've never considered what happened between James Bond and Moneypenny to not be consensual. You know, they went back and forth, back and forth. Harassment is when one person is, you know, basically making advances that the other person doesn't appreciate. We learn later on, I think it's in the last Bond, in No Time to Die, Moneypenny's really into James. So, you know, so there.
And most of the time, it was Moneypenny was the one initiating it more so than Bond. Bond would reciprocate, but she was usually the kind of the instigator. Yeah.
So that scene made me cringe a little. I was like, oh yeah, that's right. I remember that. I remember when the thing that happened the most, and I even have friends who are newscasters, and I would ask them this question. I go, is it called harassment or harassment? Because I've heard it both ways.
The British seem to call it harassment.
Yeah, it's a very British way of saying that. It's like schedule.
Schedule, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but it is that way where they're winking towards being modern. But in the end, they're like, okay, we'll acknowledge that we're modern, but we're really just going to be Bond. And I think the mistake I made watching GoldenEye this last time was I watched it right after Spectre and before No Time to Die. And I was used to seeing GoldenEye after the Roger Moore films, after like View to a Kill. And I was like, oh, this is so much more grounded, so much more realistic. To see where they took it with Daniel Craig, it felt like going back to Roger Moore. Because Brosnan is that transition period where it is a little more realistic than the Moore, or I mean, the Daltons are kind of their own thing, I think, more than a track of how the Broccoli's were shepherding Bond. But he's definitely he's the bridge between Roger Moore and Daniel Craig.
I'm thinking, yeah, you make a good point. The Tim Dalton movies, they're more standalones, and I'm projecting ahead already. I will bet money that once they've sorted out who the new Bond is going to be and they've decided what the next movie is going to be and so on, they're going to go back to the standalones again. None of this, constant linking everything together. So that way people can just walk into a Bond film and enjoy it. We're telling everyone right now, if you want to see No Time to Die, you probably should see Spectre first so you can really enjoy it, really get it. But I'm like, Spectre is like the weakest of the Craig Bond films.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're actually having a guest on in a few weeks. She's going to be on for Spectre. It's Dave. I'm going to blame Dave. I go, Dave, you're making her watch the worst of the Craig films to be on the show.
You still think it's worse than Quantum of Solace?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I see. Quantum of Solace feels, like Casino Royale 2.1, and it's just tying up all the loose ends from Casino Royale.
Yeah.
It feels like. Does it have the same level of? Does it have the same level of writing? Is the script as tight? No, but again, for folks who weren't aware, that Quantum of Solace took place during the writer's strike.
Yeah,
and there were no screenwriters on that set. It was pretty much Daniel Craig and Mark Forster sitting down with the script that they had and figuring out what they wanted to do. The fact that they were able to do that and still make a somewhat decent film, you got to give them credit for that. It was tighter, and the ending was a little pat, a little too, too quaint, too many loose ends tied up for my taste at the end there. But hey, they wanted him to get it done, and you didn't have that huge delay. So,
yeah, I always say that because I think Quantum of Solace is criminally underrated and unfairly maligned. I don't think it's a perfect movie, but it's far from being one of the worst Bond movies. And as Elliott pointed out, it's not even the worst Daniel Craig movie.
Well, if you think that Spectre is worse.
Yeah.
Quantum of Solace seems to just run out of steam on you. It starts well, but Spectre starts even better. But Spectre, I think, is more important. As we said, you couldn't see No Time to Die without Spectre, where you could skip Quantum of Solace if you really wanted to.
Yeah.
So that
you can watch Casino Royale and skip right over to Skyfall, and you would have.
Yeah, you can. I mean, he's going to mention Vesper in all the films anyway.
Yeah. Did you guys happen to hear what Edgar Wright said about Bond a couple days ago?
No.
Yeah, that he has an idea that he'll pitch if they'll ask him. If the Broccoli's say, if they approach him and say, "What's your Bond idea?" He did. And I gotta tell you something. I would love to see an Edgar Wright Bond film, but you're not gonna see an Edgar Wright Bond film.
You didn't see an Edgar Wright Marvel film.
No, and I think he would run into the same issues that Danny Boyle ran into.
Mm-hmm.
Which is he's gonna be like just a little too far out there for comfort.
Yeah,
they're gonna want to bring it in because when you look at the test stuff that Edgar Wright created to pitch Ant-Man to Marvel, that got him the Marvel gig. And when he actually sat down to make the movie, the Marvel folks are like, "Okay, no, bring it in," and he's like, "No, I this is what I want to do. This is my vision." They go, "No, if you want to do it, you got to do it our way. Bring it in." And so he's done.
Yeah,
Same thing with Danny Boyle. Yeah.
It's like Quentin Tarantino's Star Trek. He can talk about it as much as he wants, but we're never going to see it.
Not going to see it. The studio's not going to allow it.
Right.
Now, if you decide, if you want, say, Quentin Tarantino to write a Star Trek comic book, I'm sure a publisher will do it. But
or you want like a Seth MacFarlane where he basically does Star Trek but takes out all the licensing.
Yeah.
So and then he gets the freedom.
He had Edgar Wright. He's staying, I think, tight-lipped about what his pitch would be in case they do hire him. He doesn't want to give away his plan or his idea, but he had an interesting theory, which I kind of agree with, although it doesn't completely hold together. But it was basically that he had a chocolate theory for James Bond, and that is you go back and forth between milk chocolate and dark chocolate. So Sean Connery was dark chocolate, Roger Moore was milk chocolate. Lazenby, it's kind of, he doesn't really have his own era because he just did one movie and it was kind of in the middle of the Sean Connery, so that doesn't totally work. But then
he's vanilla chocolate. We'll give him that.
He's vanilla chocolate, yeah. He's where is it Toblerone? Where is that? Is that Australian? What is Australian chocolate? Oh, whatever it is. So Dalton is dark chocolate, Brosnan milk chocolate, and then Daniel Craig's dark. So what that means is we'll probably get a lighter touch Bond for the next iteration, which I think is what they need. I think, like you said, Elliott, they should go back to standalone style movies and something a little lighter than what we've been getting with the Craig movies. And if Edgar Wright does somehow get that gig, I think he'll give us something a little lighter hearted than what we've been getting.
Will we get James Bond chocolate bars then? The thing too, and you would get a lighter touch, great. And you're gonna have to get shorter movies, okay? Because the James Bond films were getting progressively longer and longer, and I think that was affecting the box office. That was affecting the number of people who were gonna go see these films. When you had this whole continuity thing going, the folks who went to see these films were the die-hard Bond fans. Mm-hmm. It's like you're gonna get decent box office, but it's going to be like the DC movies. The only folks who go to see the DC movies are the real DC fans. Those real diehard DC fans who love those characters. They're the ones going. Whereas everyone's going to see the freaking Marvel movies. They appeal to a very wide audience. And dare I say it, would they want to consider making Bond a tad more family friendly? Because all these Bond movies, I've seen on social media a lot of friends who wanted to bring their kids to go see No Time to Die, and after they saw it, they went, "Okay, this one's a little violent. I'm not going to bring my younger kid to see this." Yeah,
but Bond's always going to be sexy. If you take that out, you've lost a key part of what makes it work. I think you don't want single-aged kids going to see Bond. I mean, I saw them on TV and. I liked the action and I got bored. I don't think you want a 90-minute Bond film with no sex because 9-year-olds can go.
Well, yeah, but you could but you said it yourself. They showed the Bond movies, like all those Bond movies on television. Yeah, the more Bond movies, a lot of that you saw more on top of a woman on a bed sucking her face. So and
I didn't like it. I was like, "Where's Jaws in the car that goes in the ocean?"
Right. That is true, though. That is, I know, Dave. I know you love some of those Aston Martins. I totally love the submarine car. Was it Alfa Romeo? I'm trying to remember.
Lotus. The Lotus.
A Lotus. That's right. I love the submarine Lotus. That was my jam right there. Because the car that flew, you needed too many attachments for it.
Well, it's funny, every time Q develops a new car, it always has some feature that you never see again in any of the other cars. Like, was that Lotus the only car Bond got that ever could go underwater? You'd think that they could apply that technology to that one car, make every car he's ever given from that point forward submersible. It's just you see it in one movie.
And then you have the add-ons. Not only can it go underwater, but it can also fly and those things.
And turn invisible, which you'll see in a couple of weeks.
But yes, which is cool. Which is pretty cool. Back to Goldeneye, because we keep bouncing all over here. It should be noted, yes, Goldeneye came out in 1995, starring Pierce Brosnan in his inaugural run as James Bond, co-starring Sean Bean, Famke Janssen, who did it for me. I'm telling you, she's probably my all-time favorite Bond girl. Natalia Simonova, Judi Dench, with a screenplay by Jeffrey Kane and Bruce Firestein, off a story by Michael France, and directed by Martin Campbell, who will also direct Casino Royale. So Martin Campbell, great director, in charge of not one, but two Bond reboots. Yes. He would also go on to do The Legend of Zorro, and do 2 Zorro movies, which are also really good. So Martin Campbell, I'm going to tell you, when they brought him on board to make this film, the Broccoli's really knew what they were doing. They were bringing on a director who had a strong visual sense, that really did some incredible camera work, great stunt work, the action scenes, the transitions, the storytelling, all top notch. Something that you hadn't seen in a Bond film since Irvin Kershner on Never Say Never Again. And I think would really raise the level for Bond directors afterwards. And then you would see the Broccoli's going forward are going to go and find the new, the next hot director, someone with a great, visual sense to really give the franchise, a new bit of polish to it. And Famke Janssen, who would break out into the scene in this is before she would be cast as Jean Grey in the X-Men movies. And the character of Zanya Onatop. And you talk about the sex in Bond films, and Bond's got to be sexy. It's true. The scene between her and Pierce Brosnan in the sauna, where you're like, wait, is she there to seduce him and bring him to the big bad, or is she just going to kill him right there?
She's going to kill him. We saw that she kills people with her legs, and that's exactly what she was trying to do with him.
What a way to go.
Famke Janssen, I'm sure you remember, Elliott. I found one credit earlier than Goldeneye because, of course, she would go on to do X-Men 5 years later. She is in an episode of Star Trek Next Generation where she is the perfect woman because, and she's this alien race that imprints upon the first man they see, so they bring her onto the ship in this, coffin.
It's the one that she falls in love with Jean-Luc, right?
Yeah, with Picard. And she holds her own with Patrick Stewart. And, of course, they would go on to make a lot of movies together. But she's somebody that's always fantastic. It's like she doesn't seem to me to be an actress that's going to age out. It's
funny how the Broccolis are able to find all these models and who have great acting chops, which is not unheard of. I mean, Tricia Helfer, before she did the Battlestar Galactica reboot, was also a model. Great actress. You find them out there, but the fact that they're able to find them, and Zanya Onatop is just a great villain. The bit when John Bean's character is shooting, 006 is shooting a bunch of folks, and then she's in back. She's like, she's experiencing almost a sexual
orgasm.
pleasure.
It's
from
an
seeing-
orgasm.
Yeah, I didn't want to say it, but yeah.
And the most Russian actor available outside of Russia gives her a look.
Yeah, so it was like, wow. It made me think of that scene with Christopher Walken in The Living Daylights, where he's like mowing down all those construction workers.
Oh,
and
Feudal
just-
Kill?
Yeah,
Feudal
I'm sorry.
Kill, yeah.
Why do I keep doing that? I keep wanting to put Chris Walken in different Bond movies.
I'm all for that.
Yeah.
Put him in as many as you want.
Yeah, he should be Q. I built this pen. This pen has a flashlight in it. You could shine it in a guy's eyes, and he'd be like, "Oh, there's lights in my eyes," and then you punch him.
Pay attention.
Worked really hard. I worked so hard on this.
Didn't he just retire? I think Chris Walken just retired from acting, though.
I read that about Michael Caine.
Yeah, Michael Caine. He
That's
said
right.
he did. He said he didn't.
Yeah,
So I don't know
Yeah.
where that ended up.
it's going back and forth, back and forth.
Well, Connery did the same thing. Connery didn't just go.
Yeah.
But it's not too late to put Chris Walken in a Bond film, so that would
Yeah.
be that
Again,
would be fun when you think about it.
Yeah.
How many actors outside of being, let's say, protagonists? How many actors have come back to play villains in Bond films? Have any? I don't remember of any. Is there
I don't
somebody
think so.
I'm missing?
Well, you get, not to change the subject, but on a similar note, you have Joe Don Baker, who was in The Living Daylights, coming back to play his ally, who's basically Felix Leiter. I don't know why they didn't call him Felix Leiter. They were trying to kind of distance themselves from License to Kill and give Brosnan his own new ally, but he's basically playing a Felix Leiter character.
Joe Baker's one of those actors where I don't know if he's good or not. It's like he's really confident. I think the problem with Joe Don Baker, and I think Joe Don Baker knows this, is that one of the most popular episodes of Mystery Science Theater was a movie he made called Mitchell. And it's really well known because it was the creator Joel Hodgson's last episode. But also Joe Don Baker was not happy that they did that. So every time Joe Don Baker shows up, I'm like, well, this guy's Mystery Science level. And they're giving him the Aston Martin to drive around.
That did drive me nuts about Goldeneye. That I remember there being so much publicity about that car in the lead up to the movie. And yes, Q tells Bond all the great gadgets that the car has, which he never uses. He just,
Rockets behind the headlights.
yeah,
you don't
all that cool stuff. And I was waiting for the scene. All right, this is gonna be so cool. Nope.
And it's not like they had a ton of deleted scenes on the DVD. It's not like that was something that got cut out. And maybe that tank scene was supposed to be the Aston Martin. And then they were like, what if he gets in a tank?
Yeah. I think the best use of a car in the Brosnan movies is Tomorrow Never Dies, when he's got the BMW that he controls with his phone.
Yes.
He's in the back.
He's in the back seat.
Having the time of his life.
That is a great scene. That is, I remember going, this is probably the most original stunt they've ever done in a Bond film. At least to date, it was.
Yeah.
You're right. I forgot. Joe Don Baker was, what's his face?
Brad Whitaker in The Living Daylights. I buy him much more as Bond's ally than I do as a villain.
So kind of like it screws with your head if you're like with everything. I don't know if you can pull that off now with audiences, because it causes so much confusion these days with today's audience. And you sit there, go, wait a minute, that actor's back, but they're playing a different character.
Well, it's like Judi Dench coming back to play a different version of M, even though Casino Royale was very clearly a reboot.
Right.
Yeah, that was a weird decision. I mean, I love her chemistry with Daniel Craig, so in hindsight, it worked out perfectly. But yeah, for like someone who's coming into it as a casual fan who might not be a Bond fan, that's definitely confusing.
When you go through, again, for those who are watching, and if you haven't seen all these films, I'll tell you, it's really been an experience for me. Because when you talk about the Bond films, just going on your memories, you are going to have a different opinion of them than when you actually watch them. And this whole process of and watching these films back to back to back, 1 week after another, really gives me an appreciation and kind of challenges my expectations now when it comes to movie production. Because talking about the changes from one actor to another in a Bond film, and they don't necessarily recast all the supporting characters, makes me think of this whole thing now with the Black Panther, and how people are just dead set against recasting T'Challa. You know, Chadwick Boseman will forever be, you know, the Black Panther. No other actor can play that. To which, I mean, I respect Chadwick Boseman to no end, and I wish he'd done way more, but I think it's a disservice to the character if you decide you're never going to have another actor play him again.
Yeah.
You know, we've had to learn to accept that other actors will play particular characters. I mean, I'm going to have to learn to accept at some point Disney's going to give me another Indiana Jones movie without Harrison Ford. It's going to happen. They paid all that money for that license. They're going to want to do it. It's going to happen. Unless, of course,
I still resist that because Indiana Jones is not adapted from another medium. Whereas Bond was Ian Fleming novels and Marvel or monthly comic books. That an actor stepping into those roles is always an interpretation. Like Harrison Ford created that character. I think whoever takes that on next has a much harder job to do.
But we've already had.
They tried it with Solo.
They've tried it with Solo, but we've also had 2 Captain Kirks. We've had 3 Spocks so far.
Yeah.
We've had countless, you know, Uhuras, and you know we're seeing that all over now in franchises, where you're recasting characters if you want to keep that property going. Am I saying that it's going to work? Am I saying I'm with you, John? It would be very difficult to accept someone new as Indiana Jones. But I'm just saying it's maybe in my own head, I'm going to have to learn that that's the way of the world in Hollywood.
Yeah.
You never know. You never know. I might be surprised.
And it might be good. Just like Bond, you never know how the reboot is going to affect it. You could love it. You could hate it because you're not going to just change the actor. They're going to change the world around them. And that's what Goldeneye does. I think Goldeneye does a really excellent job at world building. Of just saying, this is the tone. And they were persistent in that tone for the next 3 movies. They were like, this is the Pierce Brosnan Bond. This is what we're doing. Are you getting on board? And everyone did those. Brosnan was a really successful commercially. Like, none of those movies bombed. None of those movies, they made more money than Dalton's movies. So, and as I said, this was at a time where studios were afraid to do that. They didn't want to do that. So I think for that alone, it's a really successful film. There's a lot to love in Goldeneye. There's a lot of fun. And as much as we can shine a spotlight on it and say, well, it's not the Daniel Craigs, it's not the Connerys, you know, it's this in between kind of tone. What it does really works.
It would gross $350 million in the box office. Yes, it did make more money than the last Dalton film. Part of it, I think, was the expectation of seeing Pierce Brosnan as Bond. I was part of that. I was really looking forward to that. I remember the whole thing with him being cast as Bond, and then boom, his Remington Steel contract comes back and pulls him away from that. Although he will say I think Pierce Brosnan himself has said that maybe doing Bond right then originally was too soon for him, because I think he fit right into this role. I mean, he just stepped right into it and it worked for him. Unlike Lazenby, who I think if you had given him one more Bond film, I think he really would have grown into that character and you would have seen more of what he brings to it, his interpretation.
Yeah, and because Dalton, we got 2 movies. I feel like I have a much better sense of who Dalton was as Bond than Lazenby, because there are 2 of them. And there's a few years in between where he thinks, okay, I've done this, and let me try to do this. What are the parameters of this role? You know, what can I do that's new but not break it? And I feel like Dalton had space to explore that character. Lazenby was clearly in the broccoli machine.
Oh yeah, but he's again a model who had never done any acting before outside of a TV commercial, and even then he didn't have any lines, so he was just going in there. Essentially, got the role on arrogance alone, pure arrogance, projecting arrogance, which I respect the hell out of that. Okay,
and it never lasts.
Yeah.
I think Dalton went into it with the confidence of not the type of arrogance that Lazenby had, but he had a really strong understanding of the character, not so much from the movies, but from the movies that had been made up until that point, but from the literary Bond. And he had read all the books and had a strong understanding of the character. So he went into it knowing that he didn't want to just, do a carbon copy of what Roger Moore had been doing and bring his own spin to the table. So I think I do think that I know we've talked about this a million times, but if Dalton had done one more movie, especially something like maybe a little bit more outlandish, a little bit more spectacle, like A Spy Who Loved Me, but maybe not go to the levels of like silliness of Moonraker, even though I love Moonraker, that would have kind of cemented his legacy. Because I think, like I said, they always write to the strengths of the actor playing Bond. And every Bond movie is in some way reactionary to how the previous one was received. So if the legal and financial things didn't intrude, and we had gotten a third one, and we weren't denied of a larger Timothy Dalton era, I think the reaction would have been, okay, we like him as Bond, but the last movie was maybe a little too dark, a little too violent and humorless. Let's do something a little lighter, more gadgets, more humor. But it would have had Timothy Dalton in that type of Bond movie, which is, I think, the type of movie people needed to the larger audience who maybe weren't as much students or appreciative of the literary Bond and what he was doing, trying to bring that Bond to life. That was the type of movie they needed to see to appreciate him better as Bond, is a more kind of outlandish, larger-than-life Bond movie.
Well, Dave, do you think if Pierce Brosnan had gotten the role in 1987 and Remington Steele had ended like they said they were going to, but then the press he got as Bond got NBC to renew it, which screwed him out of Bond. Had he done his first movie in 87 like he meant to, and had he stayed until 2002 with Die Another Day, had he made 6 films instead of 4, and Timothy Dalton had made 9, do you think the tone of the Brosnan era would have been the same, or do you think it would have been more of a reaction against the Roger Moore era?
Well, it's hard. That's a really good question, because I think, and Elliott brought this up, Living Daylights, it's, except for a couple moments, it's not terribly hard to imagine Roger Moore in that movie, because when it was written, they didn't know who was going to be playing Bond. So they said, and it was the same screenwriter. So it was like, let's just kind of keep doing what we've been doing. But they wound up kind of getting a fresh take with Timothy Dalton coming in. And there are a couple moments in there that are a little more like when he's interrogating Pushkin and he's got him at gunpoint like that. You can't really, it's hard to see Roger Moore doing that. But I think we would have seen, I think the question within that question is, how would the movies have continued if there were that 6-year gap? And then Pierce Brosnan came back in 95 after having done 2 in the late 80s. How would the movies have responded? Would we continue lighter? Would we get a little bit more harder edged, kind of maybe somewhat closer in the vein of the Dalton movies, and then gotten progressively more ridiculous as the Brosnan movies kind of wound up doing? But yeah, I don't know. I don't have an answer to that question. That's a tough one.
Yeah, you just brought up the point I didn't even think of, Dave, is that I was saying, okay, what if we had 6 movies and Brosnan took the part of those 2, but we could have gotten, 8, because that 6-year gap would have been filled probably with more Brosnan movies.
Yeah.
1 or 2 more.
There were issues happening in the real world off screen involving the rights to the Bond movies being sold. And that's what put a halt on the continuation of the films into the early 90s. So regardless of, even if Brosnan had taken over, and that's why, and I brought this up to Elliott, there's kind of this misconception that Dalton was so unpopular, it like killed Bond in the late 80s, and that's why we didn't get any Bond movies in the early 90s, which is not true at all. It had nothing to do with with how he was received or the box office performance of his movies. It was purely legal, off-screen stuff that was happening. So even if Brosnan had taken over in 87, you still probably would have had that 6-year gap. But like I said, if he did come back, because we've seen now a Bond actor can return after a 6-year gap. What tone the movies would have taken or headed towards throughout the late 90s into the early 2000s.
Yeah. Oh, Elliott, you're muted.
No wonder. I kept trying to jump in, and I thought you guys were just ignoring me. You could have taken Tim Dalton and plugged him into Goldeneye. I think it would have worked just fine. In fact, it would.
But when Goldeneye was written, he was still the Bond of record, so it was written with him in mind. And actually, it's easy to imagine him in Goldeneye. I kind of like the juxtaposition of License to Kill. Say there was no Bond movie in 1991 and 93, and he had stayed on, and we went License to Kill to Goldeneye with Dalton in both movies. You have License to Kill where he kind of puts his career, his job on the line over a personal vendetta because of what was this horrible crime that was done against his best friend. And then something kind of similar happens in Goldeneye, except it kind of comes back to bite him because it winds up his friend is actually working for the other side and screws him.
That's a twist that I think gives Goldeneye such a individual character, rather than, because I think part of the problem with License to Kill was it was almost an 80s cop movie, I'm going to get revenge for the death of my partner kind of stuff that was very popular at the time. And I think the twist of Sean Bean turning into the villain was really unexpected at the time.
Yeah, and I think some of the dialogue might actually have worked better with Dalton, especially like the scene with M. Whereas how is this older, kind of more world-weary Bond responding to the world changing around him, and now he has to answer to a woman, rather than being like a fresh-faced Bond that we're seeing for the first time, sort of referring to this reputation that he has of being a relic of the Cold War and being a womanizer and all that. Having Judi Dench saying those lines to an older Dalton who now has to answer to a woman for the first time in his life might have worked a little bit better or like had a little bit more impact,
Yeah, you make me want to see a lot of YouTube deep fakes now. I want to see every Bond in every movie.
I think someone did one of him of Dalton in Goldeneye, and it looks pretty good.
I could see it. He's still. You're right. He's still the appropriate age at that point.
Yeah, he could have played Bond into the late 90s, if not the early 2000s.
Yeah,
he aged really well.
Yeah, he did. I think he lost his hair, but they probably would have given him wigs.
I mean, Connery was practically a cue ball when he started playing Bond.
Yeah,
that didn't stop him.
Well, now we have these hair plugs and all that kind of stuff where you even have former bald Chicago football stars walking around with full heads of hair. So
yeah,
you always handle that.
And I know I told you this. I know I told you guys the story on Man with a Golden Gun, and I just like telling the story again. That Christopher Lee was bald, and on a film he played a bald character and made the hair and makeup people put his toupee on and then put a bald cap over his toupee. It makes me love him so much. Just the thought of him sitting in the makeup chair, just completely dignified, doing the craziest thing.
Let's see. I know you've got to go in a bit, John. So before we let you go, tell us a little bit about what you've got going on over at Caffeinated Comics.
Oh, yeah. I think I could squeeze out a little more time. I feel like we haven't even gotten into Goldeneye too much.
Yeah, welcome to it. My whole thing too, especially with Pierce Brosnan, I'm kind of the thought right now that Bond, like any Bond actor, should do 3 minimum, and if we really like him, they do 4. But I think 4 is the perfect number for a Bond actor, say moving forward.
But now Daniel Craig did 5.
Yeah,
I mean,
but even he said it was a bit much. They had to really pull him back to do that last one. So I mean, drop. You said you guys weren't crazy about Quantum of Solace. It's like when the gymnast you lose the top and the bottom score. Drop the bottom score, the worst movie of the Craig films. You still have 4 solid Bond films.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think Pierce Brosnan probably was in the role the perfect amount of time.
Yeah.
For a Bond movie, because when he gets, I'm not gonna say he was really aging. He certainly didn't age like Sean Connery did.
No.
Roger Moore.
Or Roger Moore.
Or Roger Moore, right? But I mean, you always, Dave, you always talk about, and it is incredibly dramatic how much Sean Connery seems to age just between like the early movies. It's like out of nowhere. I'm like, dude, cocaine must be a hell of a drug. I mean,
it's primarily from You Only Live Twice to Diamonds Are Forever.
Yeah, that's a big
jump. Yeah, he stepped away in 60 after You Only Live Twice in 67, and then you got Lazenby, and then they lured him back for Diamonds Are Forever, and it's just like, man, he looked like he aged about 15 years.
Something happened with his eyebrows just took over.
Yeah, he had levy eyebrows in that movie.
Yeah, he's like middle-aged Sean Connery was really creepier than old man Sean Connery.
Yeah,
He was trying to once he stopped wearing toupees, and then he was like not even Indiana Jones: The Last Crusade, like Time Bandit Sean Connery.
Yeah,
had figured it out. But Diamonds Are Forever, it was a little out there. But Pierce Brosnan, I agree. I mean, Die Another Day. It's a good time for him to stop, but he doesn't look old in the part. He's got a little bit of gray in that. But
yeah, I think he's going to come back for at least one more, especially because unlike now, at that time, they were still able to crank him out like every 3 or 4 years. So he could have come back and still looked acceptable in a 5th movie.
And I do think that Pierce Brosnan is the most genetically disposed to be Bond. If you just drew a picture of Bond, like the IDW non-licensed Bonds, your first draft would just be Pierce Brosnan because he looked so. I always say that, and with his movies, I mean, we're talking about Goldeneye, which I really like, but I always thought that we started this conversation by your friend saying that Brosnan's the worst Bond, which I don't think. I think Brosnan's a really good actor. I like seeing him in anything. I thought, as I said, he's so genetically Bond. I feel like Pierce Brosnan is to Bond is what Andrew Garfield was to Spider-Man. He was like, this guy was physically perfect for this part and a great actor. He just, the movies they gave this actor aren't the best in that franchise. Like when I first saw Andrew Garfield in the Spider-Man suit, Andrew Garfield has this long neck that I'm like, oh my God, he looks like a Mark Bagley drawing. Like he looks more like Spider-Man than Tom Holland does. But his movies aren't the best. And I think the same thing with Brosnan. Brosnan does everything that Bond does well. It's just his move. He never made a Skyfall. He never made a Goldfinger.
Yeah. I think
Goldeneye is the closest for things that were beyond his control.
Yeah, I think Goldeneye is the closest you could say to him having a classic Bond movie.
Yeah.
And I've always said, sometimes I feel like I might be a little harsh on Pierce Brosnan. Certainly my friend Mike is. But no, I think mainly he was not served best by the scripts. Goldeneye was really strong. Mm-hmm. And then, it just got kind of hit or miss after that. And I think, as Carter brought up, one of our past guests, I think it got harder with going into the late 90s. You didn't have this omnipresent threat of the Soviet Union. So it got harder to come up with really compelling villains, whereas you could always kind of fall back on that from the 60s through the 80s. You had, even though it was never really Bond specifically up against actual actors, working for this. It was always kind of like these fictionalized, characters that were somehow affiliated with the Soviets or Spectre. It was a more of a challenge because now you have Bond operating in a post-Cold War world.
Well, it was nice to be in the mid to late 90s. The Clinton era was kind of nice.
Yeah, yeah.
You look at, we didn't really have this sense of evil. You look at the stuff that the really scary characters. I mean, outside of Bond, we were going back to big monsters. We made a huge Godzilla. We made we tried to make a King Kong. They made a Mighty Joe Young. they were going outside of themselves. The X-Files was all about what was out there and we can't see it. We didn't have a lot of great villains at that time because we were kind of comfortable.
Yeah.
Fight Club was a big movie because Fight Club was about aggression in a soft society, which is what we were. And sadly, 9/11 is what stopped that. Because then it was, well, terrorists are anybody and terrorists can be anywhere. And that shifted to, like, we're really afraid of these splinter groups. And as much as we try to keep the xenophobia out and the racism out and say, no, we're not afraid of Iraq, we're not afraid of Muslims, we're afraid of people with extreme agendas. That kind of gave the action genre that fear that we needed. Because we were in the Brosnan era, America in particular, but also Great Britain, pretty complacent.
Yeah. And the Bond movies post 9/11 never went down that route of having very obviously like Middle Eastern villains, which would have been
but there were a lot of suitcase bombs and like free agents and chaos bringers. I mean, there's a lot in Skyfall that's like Dark Knight. Both Javier Bardem and Heath Ledger are these anarchistic characters that have well thought out plans, so they can create great danger. And that's definitely a post 9/11 idea. Yeah, we had Jokers and we had Spectre agents before 9/11, but they didn't have that tone.
Okay, but two things. First, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong. Did they have the rights to use Spectre in the Brosnan movies? I mean,
no, they didn't acquire those rights until 2012 or 13.
Until Spectre.
I mean, to me, if you ask me, Spectre is the perfect. It's like G.I. Joe fighting Cobra.
Yeah.
Right. Just Spectre is the Cobra of the Bond universe, but you can't do anything with him, so you got to come up with these other. Yeah, and you're right. You have to come up with things that are scary, but not too scary.
Yeah. And Cobra's one of my favorite things, and not to digress, the genius of G.I. Joe. They just announced a lot of new G.I. Joe toys, but they always go back to the 80s. And Cobra was the alchemy, and that was an invention by Marvel Comics. Yeah. Like Hasbro went to G.I. Joe, Hasbro went to Marvel and said, "Hey, we're taking the big dolls and we're making them Star Wars size. Do a comic book." And Archie Goodwin said, "Who do they fight?" And they were like, "What?" Because the G.I. Joe dolls were always, this one's a mountain climber, this one's an astronaut. It's like, no, do that. And Archie Goodwin said, "Oh, well, we got something." What they had was Hydra. The first year or two of G.I. Joe, they're just fighting Hydra.
Which now are Nazis in the Marvel universe.
Yeah, but they were like faceless guys. And then the real genius was the 80s when they got really into Mad Max. They're just maniacs they came out with every year. And that's what made that thing work. And you're right, Spectre is that spine. You need a great villain. You need Blofeld. You need, you can't fight these faceless villains over and over and over again. It's not as interesting. It's not as compelling. And maybe that's what Brosnan suffers from. Are you scared of Jonathan Pryce?
Well, actually, if he plays more of a Jeff Bezos, I'd be.
Yeah. Well, Jeff Bezos already looks like Lex Luthor.
Yeah. I thought he was the idea of his character, Elliott Carver, was maybe the most interesting idea.
Yeah.
For a Bond villain in any of the Brosnan films, like this media mogul who's manipulating world events to boost his massive media. That's really cool. I just don't think it lived up to its potential as an idea. No.
Now it would be. I mean, the thing is, people didn't quite buy it. Now I think if you watch it, it's quite prescient.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to respond to someone on our YouTube page. Apitz, pardon me. I know I'm mispronouncing your name. What T-shirt am I wearing now? This is a T-shirt I got off of T Fury. It's the Battle of Yavin as a video game. So if you ever look for it, I pulled this one out of the closet because if you watch enough of the show, you will see that I tend to wear black T-shirts. Why do I wear black T-shirts?
Because you're evil.
Yes, and I'm also fat. And black really hides the
You're the kingpin.
The kingpin. I've got I've got a lot of COVID weight I'm trying to hide right now. So yeah, that what it said. Thanks for asking on our Facebook page about that. And yes, thanks to everyone who is commenting on Facebook and on Twitch. I would say to the bit about Bond baddies, they're always, I know, Dave, you said it, the Bond movies always tend to be like, 2 minutes into the future? 2 minutes into the future? Goldeneye held up to that. I think coming up with a post-Cold War baddie. We saw that in Goldeneye. I watched The West Wing. A lot of folks know I'm a big nerd for that. A lot of the themes that were explored in Goldeneye, boom, you saw happening in an entire season of The West Wing. So that was something that was very prevalent throughout media and in movies. Was that correct? John, you would know this. Air Force One.
Air Force One was 1998. It's a little after Goldeneye.
Little after Goldeneye, right? But it was
97. I think it's the same year as Men in Black.
So right, Russian nationals though, right? Because they weren't. We're not at war with the Russians anymore. But Gary Oldman plays a former Russian national, who's like really pissed off, and so it's the splinter groups and all that. They become the thing. They become the thing at that point. Now, and then we go on to the Russian mafia, the Russian mob. That's a big thing now. Still, we're talking about the Russian mob, Russian hackers.
Oh. Yeah, you have Hagrid running the Russian mob in this movie. Probably Coltrane.
His mistress played by a young Minnie Driver.
Yes, who's great at it.
Who's strangling the cat?
Yeah, you can tell they set him up to be a recurring character, and he only makes one more appearance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
but we also need, speaking of villains and being prescient, I think we also need to talk about Alan Cumming in this movie.
Yes,
another X-Men, two X-Men actors in one movie.
Yes, yeah, Alan Cumming being an internet troll.
Yes,
in '95, where he was creating 8-bit graphics.
But it was like the whole thing. Oh, you can't, you're going to spike me. And the way you spike somebody else is as you're in a chat room with them, you type the word spike and you hit enter. And you can't let them know you're doing that.
There are no mice in 90s technology. Everything is typing. If you type really fast, that means you're a hacker.
You're a hacker.
And also, as you said, Alan Cumming, another X-Men actor, acted opposite Famke Janssen in X-Men 2, which I believe is 2002, same year as Die Another Day. A reserved performance as a blue-skinned teleporting mutant compared to Goldeneye. He is so sweaty in this movie. And for an actor, I mean, obviously he's playing a character, but for an actor is outspokenly gay, to be that heteroly.
Horny?
Everything is about boobs and asses. And I was watching it going, but you're Alan Cumming. It's like Ian McKellen chasing the ladies.
I'm sorry, has pretty much, if you ask me, the most anticlimactic death at the end of the movie.
It's very I'm invincible. It's very contrived.
I know,
but the scene with the pen.
The pen, that was good.
The tension works so perfectly that every time I watch the movie, I am counting. And I've seen this movie enough where I know when it goes off and when it doesn't. It doesn't matter. Like the editing in that scene, Martin Campbell knows exactly when to go right to the hand because he's nervously just hitting it and hitting it and hitting it. And Q says 3 times it'll blow up, 3 times it'll stop.
But that goes back to Martin Campbell, knowing how to get those scenes. The editor does an incredible job. All of this goes together. Yes, you have a Bond, a bad guy lair kind of blows up, not entirely. And I'm still like, don't any of these things have like fire suppression?
That's what kills Alan Cumming. The fire suppression.
Well, look, it's like Freon gas. You just got frozen solid.
There you go. The blowing up of the base of the end is not the most impressive, but the attack on Natasha's workplace, like this bunker in the middle of Russia under a satellite dish where she works with Alan Cumming, that is really gripping because there's, again, Martin Campbell just leaves these moments where Natasha's trapped under that stuff and you don't know how she's going to get out. And she starts like climbing up the structure of the dish that had collapsed right in. And every time I watch that, I'm like, that can't support your weight, right? That's like the only way. And when the monitors almost crush her, it's really gripping, that scene.
Yeah. And add to that she really does have a role in helping Bond through everything as the movie progresses. You know, she's the one who has to, you know, deal with the whole the reverse hack. She's the one who kind of explains, you know, says this is what's going on here. And then the bit when they're in the Russian jail and the general walks in and they're trying to do the double cross back and forth. And you're like, I was like, again, the way everyone was playing off of everyone else and the way, again, Natalia Simonova played it, sexy, smart, capable, not a screaming Mimi. The bit, well, with the exception of the bit when Pierce Brosnan has been drugged and now her screaming wakes him up.
You wake up, mister. But that's part of the story. Otherwise, he probably would have been unconscious when the helicopter exploded.
But it was done so well. I mean, I'm saying it was done so well. I mean, her screaming, it wasn't like, oh, this is just shrill.
It's a smash cut to that because you're with Bond getting knocked out, and then that's the first thing you, as an audience member, is her screaming, and you don't know where you are when Bond gets up. I love the scene where she's got to go to a computer because it's 1995. Yeah. So she goes to a computer store to use a computer, but the confidence she has when she's like, oh, I'm going to buy 100 computers, get out. and there's this one line where where the salesman comes back and he's like, is everything satisfactory? Everything except the interruption. I'm like, that woman knows what she's doing.
I mean, she could boss me around. I don't know.
She does. It's kind of a dead heat between her and Famke Janssen as far as Bond girls and that.
Yeah, that's true. No, she is. But she does have the one cringe line, if you ask me, when Bond is sitting on the beach. He's looking out over the waves rolling in, and he's just reflecting on the fact that he has to kill and take lives. And she comes up to him and she goes, "Oh, why are you like this?" He goes, "It's because it keeps me alive and keeps you alone." I'm like, okay, there we go. That was another cringe line right there. I mean, I can tell what they were going for. They were trying to give Bond some depth, you know, some gravitas, this inner turmoil, you know, that
which they had never done before. I mean, you guys have been going chronologically. He's perfectly fine with who he is up until that point.
Yeah, he doesn't mind killing people. No, he's like, I don't know.
He's fine with it. The most cringeworthy thing I find in this movie that has not aged well is the soundtrack. That the soundtrack is cringier than any line of dialogue. Just the beginning when he's driving the Aston Martin and he's taking like the road test, you know, with the dowdy British woman who's like Margaret Dumont in the car and Famke Janssen's chasing him for no reason. It's this synth track that's going like just like what? And then they knock over the bicycles. That's the Roger Moore of it.
Yeah.
Where, you know, I think we talked about this with the Man with the Golden Gun when they do the amazing car flip, but they add a slide whistle.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh, this is funny. It totally undercuts what they're doing in terms of an action movie.
You know, it's
a very polarizing soundtrack amongst Bond. I kind of like it at times. It's got that, maybe because I'm associating it with the video game, the N64 game, but it's got that kind of cold industrial feel, which felt very like early to midnight.
It's still like sparky and punky.
Yeah,
it's not intimidating at all.
Yeah. No, we do get a classic rendition of the Bond theme during the tank chase through St. Petersburg. I think that was like a bone thrown to the fans. Like, yeah, this soundtrack is weird, but we're gonna give you like a classic John Barry sounding Bond theme in the
like when he's driving the tank, we get the full John Barry treatment, and that's when we feel we're in a comfortable place.
Yeah.
And I love that whole sequence. He's driving a tank and he fixes his tie.
I think that was like Daniel Craig's signature Bond movie because signature Bond move because he does that in The World's Not Enough as well. When he's got the Q boat and he goes underwater, he fixes his tie while he's underwater.
Yeah,
it's like Bond adjusting his cuffs or Daniel Craig that's like his signature move. The tie thing was Brosnan's move.
Yeah. Daniel Craig does the cuffs in Skyfall when he rips the train apart.
Yeah,
and he walks across the train and then just. Yeah, it's the little dusting. It's that move. But you're right. Each one of them has their own signature.
What do you guys think of the theme song?
I was going to say the theme song. This would also get a lot of press because it was written by Bono and The Edge. You have to make the theme song as big of an event as possible. So having Bono and The Edge write it with vocals by Tina Turner.
Yeah, it's very much an attempt to do Goldfinger. It's like it's you two trying to write Goldfinger.
Yeah,
and that's how it comes across. I think it's a good one. It's a little derivative.
Yeah,
but it's like we don't have Shirley Bassey, we have Tina Turner, and but I'd say it's up there. It's in my top 5.
Yeah. The only thing that I don't like about it is the brass is so like tinny sounding. It doesn't have that.
That's the production of it.
Yeah, I don't know what it is.
They're trying to get those John Barry horns.
Yeah, and it doesn't quite land,
Yeah.
I will say of the theme songs, it does have the most classic Bond feel to it.
Yeah.
I mean, you can sound like a Bond theme. And then you can I can see Goldeneye fitting on any of the earlier Bond films.
Yeah,
that theme song fitting in the earlier ones.
Yeah.
After that, I did skip ahead and I watched Tomorrow Never Dies. I watched the beginning of that, and I was like not as impressed with the theme song. Yeah. Having garbage do The World Is Not Enough. Now that
Shirley Manson. Tomorrow Never Dies. That's Sheryl Crow, isn't it?
Tomorrow Never Dies is Sheryl Crow. Yeah, but I was saying I think The World's Not Enough is the best Brosnan era theme.
Yeah,
it's my favorite of the 4. Yeah,
that one. So it's like they found it there, and then of course when you talk about throw out the lowest score. Die Another Day. Oh. That one, leave.
I remember I was in the theater with my girlfriend at the time, and she actually said out loud, "Is there something wrong with the speaker?" when the Die Another Day thing came on, because it has this like chopped up staccato.
It takes a really great opening credit sequence and just ruins it with the song. I mean,
yeah, that might be the worst.
I mean, you've never seen James Bond tortured like that. I mean, until, of course, Casino Royale.
Right.
But having a scene like that where Bond is being tortured.
Yeah.
This was like during the time
a lot more ominous.
Yeah.
And that's the only credit sequence that furthers the narrative of the story.
Yeah. Yes.
Where you actually see everything he went through during the 14 months he was in prison. Mm-hmm. And you see, one thing I'll say about the Brosnan movies, and it starts right from the beginning with the Goldeneye, I love the opening credits sequence, the title credits sequences for all 4 of the movies. They got Daniel Kleinman, who I think he does all the Brosnans. I think he did all of the Daniel Craig's with the exception of Quantum of Solace, because I just love the imagery in all those. Mm-hmm. I think with the early movies, Morris Binder did all those. For the most part, I think except for a couple really early on, he was great. He was a legend in the Bond, the history of Bond. But I think by the end, he was starting to get a little burnt out. Like there's only so many ways you can have nude silhouetted women dancing around. But then Daniel Kleinman, you have some of that, which you see in Goldeneye, but then he have like the hammers and sickles
Yeah, I love the broken
The
Russian
guns
statues.
coming out of the women's mouths. It's really cool. Cool
Yeah,
stuff.
and Casino Royale has that great graphic where everything's a playing card.
Yeah, all playing
He
cards.
really got into like, this is the theme of this Bond movie, and I'm going to bring that across with, of course, girls and guns.
Yeah, and then No Time to Die, you see the DNA strands with made up of little guns.
Yeah,
that was cool. I was thinking it's surprising that, well, I mean, like, technically they did a Bond theme, that U2 have never actually done a Bond theme. I mean, this is the closest thing probably at this point we'll get them writing this one. But then I remembered they also did that song for the Batman Forever soundtrack. They came out the same year. Hold Me, Thrill Me, Kiss Me.
Oh, yeah.
It was kind of Bond sounding.
That was actually a B-side. They didn't even write that for that film. They
Oh,
had
really? Okay.
They had written so much for Octung Baby that they just had it. And so when Warner Brothers called, they were like, well, we never put this one out. Do that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does have kind of that. I think because it has that cinematic feeling. It has the strings on that. Yeah.
That movie has a great soundtrack, Batman Forever.
Yeah, probably the best thing about that movie.
I'm telling you, I liked Batman Forever. I'm one of those people. I mean, I liked it. I liked Val Kilmer as Batman. I thought he was good.
I thought he was a good Bruce Wayne. The problem with Batman Forever is that Joel Schumacher directed it, and now all you see are the seeds of Batman and Robin. Where like anything that's a little annoying in Batman Forever that you would have forgiven, it's like, oh, he's going to take that run with it. Like you see, it's almost like the top of a roller coaster where you just see down.
And it's funny because Joel Schumacher can actually do serious shit, but when you give him a comic book movie, it goes over the top.
I didn't want to say it, but Martin Campbell directed Green Lantern.
I think off of
Not
Jeff
everybody
Johns,
can do everything.
Joel
again,
Schumacher said he wanted to come back to do a third, and he wanted it to be dark and tie into like the first Batman and have like Harley Quinn be Joker's daughter, and Robin would be out of the picture. It would be like I mean, he proved if you look at some other movies, he could do a serious.
He can, yes,
he can.
Dramatic Batman movie. He just chose to do something that was like a live action, like a big budget Adam West style Batman.
Right. Yeah. And then went further than that.
Yeah.
When he has Batman with his own American Express card, his own branded American Express
Yes.
card.
Where does the bill go to? How do you have a secret identity with a credit card?
Expiration date forever.
Oh, just remember, there's a scene in Dark Knight where the guy's working at Wayne Enterprises comes in and he's like, "Hey, I found out we've been billing all this stuff and we built the Batmobile, so I'm gonna extort Bruce Wayne." If Batman has a credit card, somebody just goes, all of Batman's credit card bills are showing up at stately Wayne Manor. Why do you think that is?
That'll be a conversation when we do get to Die of the Day, when Bond has been in prison for 14 months in a North Korean prison camp, and now that he's out, he can still get a great hotel room. And
he knows what he's doing. He's got that huge bushy beard.
The beard. You get a nice. He can get a masseuse. He can get a haircut, a shave. He can get a whole line of. He's still got a good line of credit. He can buy some new suits.
That's the part I like about that movie. Bond's gonna Bond.
I really like that movie up until the point it moves to Iceland. There's a lot of fun stuff to like in like the first 45 minutes of that movie, and then, like you said, it's the roller coaster. It just all goes downhill.
Yeah, I remember making the mistake of, after I saw it in the theater, somebody asked me if the lecture. I was like, "Oh, it was really good," and I realized I just had a good evening at the theater, because then I bought the DVD and I was like, "Why did I tell anyone this was good?"
I'm gonna have to make a note of that, because not watching that one for a couple of weeks, but yeah, I gotta remember that. I honestly don't remember Die Another Day that much. I don't. I remember the first part. That's about it. Which I guess says a lot for the movie.
You're in for a treat.
Kind of makes you want to watch it.
So again, all the movies we're seeing now, we're revisiting. For those who've just, if you've just been watching this show, there were a lot of movies. Like, I had not seen any of the early Sean Connery ones. I had
You
not
had seen them, just not in years, right?
I'm sorry.
You had seen all the Connerys, just not like in a long time, right?
I had seen parts of them on television with my dad, and some I'd never seen at all.
Okay. Because
So
I knew you said you'd never seen The Lazenby one,
never,
and you had never
at
seen
all.
Octopussy or License to Kill, which happen to be three of like my absolute favorites.
So yeah. Now I have seen all the Pierce Brosnan movies. I've seen all the Daniel Craig ones.
Mhm.
So it's going to be me revisiting them in context and then seeing, how they compare. I'm trying to think about another thing with a Goldeneye. It's funny that you talk about you like the soundtrack so much, Dave, because it reminds you of the video game. When you say Goldeneye, I can't think of any Bond movie where it seems like the merchandising kind of eclipse the movie itself.
Yeah.
Like you'll get people split. So there are people who really like Goldeneye, but I have never met anyone who said, "Man, that Goldeneye video game sucked." Everyone's like, "Oh, that's a great video game." You ever see Goldeneye? Yeah. Oh yeah, great video game.
Yeah, more people remember the video game than the actual movie. And
But
I've never played the video game. It was at a time in my life where I couldn't afford a console. So, and I've asked people, I'm like, "Why is it so good?" And they're like, "Just because it is." And I'm like, "Well, what happens is like, oh, it's first person shooter, and it's the best." There's no facts they can pull out of it, but people to this day play it. There's still tournaments.
Yeah.
You can
That
get
that was like a watershed moment in the history of Bond merchandising, because I think that video game did so much to introduce millions of basically what were kids at the time to James Bond, because there hadn't been a Bond movie in 6 years. Bond was something that like their dads grew up on, and that was the same thing with me. Like weirdly, I got into Bond at this weird juncture in time where it was like right before Goldeneye came out. I know I've told this before, but it was my dad's it was Christmas or his birthday, because they were a few weeks apart. We got him the VHS box set. They re-released all the movies from Dr. No through View to a Kill. So they didn't have the Dalton movies. And for some reason, The Man with the Golden Gun wasn't included. But it was all those movies. And they were re-released to kind of boost, to promote the first Bond movie in theaters in 6 years. So we got him that for, like I said, his birthday or Christmas, whatever. We watched them all as a family. So I got into all those early Bond movies, but it was right before Goldeneye. And I don't even remember when I actually saw Goldeneye for the first time. It definitely wasn't in theaters, because the first one I saw in theaters was The World's Not Enough. But it's like people say that the Bond you grew up watching is like becomes your Bond, like the Bond you're most attached to. I think in general that's true, but I think I might be the exception to that rule, because Brosnan was really the Bond like I guess I grew up on, as far as he was the Bond of record as I was kind of coming of age. But I never was like really big into him as Bond, because I did see Connery and Moore before I saw Pierce Brosnan. But for so many people my age, or around my age, give or take a few years, likely their first introduction to James Bond was not from the movies, but was from the video game. So, and then they went on to become fans of the movie franchise because of the video game. So yeah, that game I think was hugely important to introducing like a whole new generation to Bond, who otherwise maybe would have, maybe they would have went to see the movies as they were released, but not really had that same appreciation if the game didn't exist.
Patty Vasquez Bonin says she still owns the video game.
Can she still play it?
She still playing it, Patty? Yeah, really. Because there were different consoles. I know the GoldenEye first debuted on the N64 on a cartridge of all things, and then would be ported over to Xbox. Then we follow up with 007 Nightfire. Would be the next featuring Pierce Brosnan on the cover, followed by 007 Agent Under Fire, 007 for PlayStation 2, Everything or Nothing.
Yeah, that's basically the 5th Brosnan movie.
Right.
I mean,
It's
for
a
all
good
intents and
title.
purposes. Yeah, it's Everything or Nothing, which is where the Eon Productions comes from. It's Bruce Fierstein who wrote the script for, I think he worked on this one.
Yes.
Yeah, he worked on this one. He also did Tomorrow Never Dies. He wrote the script for that video game. They got Brosnan to come back. They got Judi Dench, John Cleese. Willem Dafoe is the villain. He plays a protege of Max Zorin, Christopher Walken's character. And I think Shannon Elizabeth and Heidi Klum are the Bond girls. This was like 2004, so very era appropriate.
And this
And
is all. And Dave, this is all video.
It's a video game,
or voice actor. Okay.
Everyone, Brosnan voices himself. Every actor whose likeness they use also voices them their respective characters. So that's the closest thing we got to and I think the technology involves like nanobot technology, or the plot involves nanobots. So kind of predicting No Time to Die a little bit. Brosnan apparently wanted, if he had come back for a 5th, which he wanted to do, he wanted to go a little bit more grounded. I know there was some talk about at the time of them doing an adaptation of Casino Royale as his follow-up. That's not what this video game was. It was anything but grounded. And they also did an adaptation of a remake of Goldeneye, the video game, in 2010 with Daniel Craig. And I think it's supposed to be set like between Quantum of Solace and Skyfall. And they changed some aspects of the story to make it more relevant to like 2010 versus 1995. But I thought that was pretty interesting. And Daniel Craig voices Bond and everything.
I was going to say they've been talking, again, because of the popularity and just the enduring legend of Goldeneye. They've been talking about redoing that one again and again and again. In fact, there was the most recent re-rendering of the entire game in modern graphics that he only got so far, and then they ended up giving up. 007 Legends, I'm seeing that. I see for the PS3 has Daniel Craig on the cover.
Yeah, so that one's kind of interesting because it's Bond. He is the Bond in the game, so it's his likeness and his voice and everything. But he's playing missions from like classic Bond movies.
I see Jaws on the cover here. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's the Fort Knox raid from Goldfinger.
Yep. I
think there's the ski. There's the tanker chase from the end of License to Kill. There's the ski chase from Honor Majesty's. And I think the space, the Moonraker stuff from Moonraker, where he's in outer space.
That sounds kind of awesome.
Yeah. That does sound cool.
Yeah. 2010 would still be playable, I think.
Yeah. Well, they have it's for the PlayStation, so.
Yeah, I know the 5 can play the 4, but it can't play the 3.
Well, you can always go to Half Price Books and pick up a PS2 or a PS3. They're out there, folks. Patty says they're going to go hook up the PS2 in the basement. I am jealous right now.
I rarely play video games, but I tend to buy a console for one game every generation. So I got the PS5 for Miles Morales. I got the PS4 for Spider-Man. I got my PS2 for Arkham Asylum.
Nice.
No one's buying new systems right now. They aren't out there. I do believe.
Yeah, that's not the nanobots.
Yeah, it's either or trial by combat. You go to GameStop and essentially you have to fight in a Thunderdome to get the one PS5 console they have there.
Yeah, it took me 9 months, and I was following 5 different Twitter feeds that all they did was say like Walmart.com has them, Target.com has them, and it was 50 solid minutes of 2 laptops and a phone clicking refresh. That's how I have them.
You have way more determination than I do.
I was in a very boring meeting at the time.
See, so again, it brings me to this point. With Bond, I would think that with the next Bond, it's not like they haven't tried, although when you look at it, I have to look up that all these other Bond video games that, as cool as the ideas are, didn't quite reach the level of, say, the Goldeneye video game. Was that perfect storm of a movie, a video game, everything just coming together so that it reached the zeitgeist, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And lasted. I mean, there's not a lot of video games we talk about 20 years later.
And so would that be something that going forward, are they even going to try that again? Because Bond movies, Goldeneye, there are going to be a lot of folks are going to dismiss it because they didn't think it was that great, but that was an event. The movie made a lot of money. It established Pierce Brosnan as James Bond. You can never think of him in anything else. Yeah, he was in Mamma Mia. Okay. But you're like, oh, James Bond was in Mamma Mia. So that'll always be him. There was a time when he was, and when you're a Bond too, you're not just an American star, you're an international star, which brought me, wanted to bring me back.
Well, you're not an American star, you're a British star. And
yeah, British, but the box office in most Bond films is international box office. That's where it really makes its money. For example, No Time to Die has already made 500 million. Okay. But that's because of the international box office, and it hasn't opened in China or Australia yet. And they're expecting that to take off even more.
And that's primarily in the UK, where, it's definitely because Bond is their character. So it's a huge event for them.
But it's doing fine here. I remember when we did the podcast about it, we talked about that it was underperforming, but it's had legs. It's lasted. Mm-hmm. And there's been very, very few movies that have done well. They're saying that Dune now did fine, but they're all wondering, did it do enough to do another one? It's not a disappointment, but is it good enough? And we're still living in times where, we'd rather watch it at home. I had a friend call me and say, do you want to go see Dune in IMAX? I'd say, no, I'd rather see it for free because they're streaming it. And that's one of the things that helped No Time to Die was it wasn't streaming.
Yeah. Right. And I will say this, because I did just watch Dune on HBO Max, and I was there going, wow, this would really be good in IMAX. If I was watching this in IMAX, I could see it. Because I did see No Time to Die in IMAX.
Right.
And I am so glad I did. Because there are things I was like, this had an epic scope to it. And I will watch it again on streaming. I will watch it again in home video and all that. But I'm glad the first time I saw it was on an IMAX screen. So, not to go too far into Dune land, but, I'm not sure you would have people talking about it as much if it was just in movie theaters. Because I saw it, and I really enjoyed it. And I'm not even a big fan of Dune. So the fact that I was able to watch it at home and go, wow, this is a really good movie. I wish I'd seen it on the big screen, but at least I'm glad I saw it. Had it just been at the theater, I probably wouldn't have gone to see it.
See, I had the opposite reaction where I enjoyed it and it would have been nice to see it on a big screen, but I also like the fact that I could pause it and go get something to eat and come back. Yeah. It's a slow film.
It is.
It is. It's the same director who did Blade Runner 2049, which I loved watching on the big screen. Yeah. But I saw it on a Friday night after work. It was hard to stay awake.
Yeah.
Especially in those reclining seats.
Yeah. With Ana de Armas. I can't believe I didn't make that connection. That she's the hologram girl in a Blade Runner 2049. I knew I loved her from somewhere. Joel, I made you dinner.
I was talking about her with my wife about how she was she was in all the trailers and everything, and she was just in that one scene, basically, one scene, No Time to Die. And she said something I didn't even think of. The Bond series has this precedent of bringing back actors later on in completely different roles. They could do that with her, especially the next one will be a reboot. Like they could have her playing a completely different character, but like a primary character in, Bond 27 or, one a couple of years down the road. because we've seen that a million times in the earlier movies.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember there was a lot of talk of Halle Berry when she was in Die Another Day that they wanted to spin her off, but then Die Another Day was Die Another Day. But I did get the feeling with Ana de Armas and No Time to Die because her character was so well fleshed out.
Mm-hmm.
And I just read an article in Variety about how everything was poised for Ana de Armas to break through because she had just done Knives Out. She did the star-making turn, and then the pandemic just slowed everything down. So it's like now when we see her, I remember having this conversation with both of you. You guys were like, where have we seen her? Like, where has this girl been? And I was like, she was just in Knives Out. She was in Blade Runner. But it had been a year or two.
Yeah.
I think had that come into Blitz in like within the year as it intended, she'd be the most famous woman today.
Yeah. And she also has a movie, I think that's ultimately going to land on Netflix, where it's a Marilyn Monroe biopic where she's playing Marilyn.
Yeah.
That was supposed to come out last year, and then I would think it's bumped to sometime next year. And I saw some set photos, and like you wouldn't think of her as like an obvious choice but she looks good.
She does look good,
Black
yeah.
on and everything, yeah.
And then let's we can wrap up. I wanted to talk about with Pierce Brosnan, and I don't know if I had this conversation with you, John, that Brosnan recently made a comment while working on the Black Adam film. He's cast as Dr. Fate.
Oh yeah, they showed pictures of him in DC fandom, and he's gray and he's got a beard, and he still looks great.
He does. He looks really good.
Yeah.
They haven't released any photos of the full suit yet, have they?
No,
yeah,
just like
there was like concept art, but with his likeness. So either it's CG generated and that's it, or it's an early concept for the costume they're creating.
Okay.
But he made a comment, and Dave thinks this is kind of a dig. So he goes, "Well, I've worked on the Bond films, but this movie is probably the greatest set I've ever been on." And kind of like, yeah, I've worked on Bond, but that's nothing compared to this thing right here.
Well, because superhero movies are the biggest budgets you get. Bond used to be that. That's why the Pinewood Studios were the biggest in the world, because Bond movies were so big that England had the world's biggest studios. And now then they built ones in Australia that were bigger, and now you don't need big studios because everything's blue screen. But there was a time where Bond was as big a movie as you could possibly make. I remember Ian McKellen when they made Lord of the Rings. In an interview, he was complaining that Britain didn't make it. He's like, it's a British book. There's a British film industry. Why did an American film studio have to finance this? Because there was a time where Britain stood toe-to-toe with America.
Mm-hmm. Although the entire Cuba scene from No Time to Die was at Pinewood. That's all a set. All that.
Really?
With the when
the street
everything. It's all it was all.
Wow, I figured the ballroom and maybe even the bars, but that street looked outside.
Everything, yes, was all a set. Yeah,
movie magic.
Yeah. Well, I just watched The Terminal recently, and when you look at that film and you consider that entire airport terminal was a movie set, they made it just so Spielberg could have complete control of everything that was going on in there.
That's amazing. That's like the Seinfeld episode when they're in the parking garage, the entire episode.
Uh-huh.
That shot in their soundstage, they ripped out Jerry's apartment. They ripped out the bleachers for the audience. They used all of that space so they could drive cars around their own soundstage. And when we were looking at clips of it, it's like, why don't you just go to a mall? It looks like they went on location.
Yeah.
You're saying a mall won't shut down for a day?
Thank you for bringing that up. I can't think about that episode without feeling for Elaine's little fish that didn't make it to
That's
the end.
why you have the job you have.
Anyway, any final thoughts on Goldeneye, John?
As I said, I still really enjoy it. I'm not going to say it's one of the best Bond films, which is what I used to say. I think there have been better since, and maybe ones that I had underappreciated. But I think it's still one of my favorites, and I enjoy the experience of watching it every time. And however it dates, it may end up being in the middle, but it's still one that I get excited. Like, I don't have cable anymore, but it used to be like Thanksgiving weekend. It was like TBS would show every Bond film in a row for the weekend, and that was a way for me to not talk to my in-laws. And I used to love during that weekend just flipping it over and seeing what movie it was in. And if it's Goldeneye, I'm gonna leave it on.
Yeah.
Would you say, like, as I always say, you want to introduce someone to James Bond? They've never seen a James Bond movie. Would Goldeneye be a good candidate for that?
That's tough because, I mean, it depends on the person, which is a way of me weaseling out of your question. But it also depends on the era, because, like, I don't know if I showed it to my kids and they've seen some Bond, but I don't think they would sit through a 90s movie. The same way, the first movie I would want to show people is Goldfinger, but they would have to kind of like 60s cinema to get it. Mm-hmm. If I was showing somebody brand new, I would show them a Daniel Craig. I would show them Casino Royale. Mm-hmm. But it's one of the ones I would definitely show. I think we're very lucky that most of the Bond's first outings have been really solid. Mm-hmm. There's rarely been a Bond that like stumbled out of the gate and then caught up. Mm-hmm. So I tend to go to all of their first films. Although with Connery, I'd go to Goldfinger just because Dr. No's great, but Goldfinger's better.
Mm. Yeah. To me, Goldfinger has more memorable scenes.
Yeah.
We all remember the girl.
They started to have fun.
Yeah.
Well, I said Goldfinger's the one where they perfected the Bond formula.
Yeah.
The big stunt in the beginning. You've got the classic theme song, the gadget scene with Q, the gadget-packed car, the girl with the suggestive name, the eccentric villain, the eccentric, physically formidable henchman. It's like everything, and then everything since then has been trying to, an attempt to recreate the success of that movie and that formula.
Yeah, I agree. Everyone's kind of taking a swing. It's like what we said about the Goldeneye theme song. It's you taking a swing at the Goldfinger theme song. Mm. That's why the Aston Martin keeps coming back. As classic a car it is, it's not the only classic car out there. Yeah. But it's the Goldfinger car.
Mm-hmm.
And Dave?
I think I made all the points I was going to make. I think it's definitely the best Brosnan movie. It's kind of downhill after this. It's what I consider the only classic Brosnan movie. I don't think the next three are the worst in the series. I think my biggest complaints with the next two in particular is they're just kind of middle of the road and a little bit forgettable, which is not the worst thing in the world, but you don't want to have to describe a Bond movie as being forgettable. But I think Goldeneye is I don't know if I'd have it in the top 10 of the Bond movies, but it might be close to that. I think Brosnan is really comfortable in the role right out of the gate. It's not like, Lazenby, who had never acted before, but I think still does an adequate job, all things considered. And or Roger Moore, who I think was still kind of a little bit in the shadow of Connery in those first couple films. Mm-hmm. I think he's my big slight against Brosnan is not so much his performance as Bond, but like I mentioned earlier, the scripts that he got. And I think Goldeneye was the strongest of those four, and that's why I say the next three are kind of bring down my overall rating of him as Bond, is because they just don't live up to Goldeneye.
Yeah, that's why I say he's Andrew Garfield.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The scripts will kill you. Yeah. And I would say that's something that plagues all the Bond actors, all the predecessors.
Well, and that's the problem. I mean, you can get a producer credit and you can give notes, but when you sign for Bond, they're like, you're making 4 Bond movies. Here's the next one. If you don't like it, you're making it.
But we're going to see, though, with Daniel Craig, who has a lot more control over his character. I think that's why we see a lot more. We see a difference in the quality and how the character is portrayed. When he takes over. But we still have 3 more Pierce Brosnan movies to go. Next week will be The World Is Not. No, not The World Is Not Enough. Tomorrow Never Dies. Tomorrow Never Dies is next week. I've already started watching it. I watched the opening sequence, which I actually enjoyed quite a bit.
Yeah, it's a fun one.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that in a while. I want to watch those middle Brosnans again. I don't remember them.
In the very beginning, it's playing up Bond as kind of like the super agent, not just a secret agent, but it reminded me actually a little bit of Doctor Who, a lot of the Matt Smith Doctor Who, where they turn him. I'm sorry to go way off the beaten path for folks who just don't watch Doctor Who, but if you watch the Matt Smith episodes when he takes over, they really turn his character into an action hero. There's a lot of running, a lot of things, him blowing things up, all that kind of stuff. So there was something about that opening sequence in Tomorrow Never Dies that made me think of a Matt Smith Doctor Who episode. So Michael says, my condolences on having to watch the next 2.
So that implies that he likes Die Another Day.
I do. I don't know. Maybe.
Oh, my friend Mike. That's my
Mike. So
Mike.
Thank you, Michael, for watching and for commenting. But you know what? I enjoyed them. I mean, I'm not so strict on it. We seem to have this incredibly unrealistic expectations for our entertainment.
Well, like I said.
It's even worse. Die Another Day. No, again, Die Another Day, the theme song is by far the worst part of that. But we're not getting there yet. We're not there yet. It's going to be a little while.
Yeah, and I have a soft spot for World's Not Enough because it's the first I saw in theaters. But as I've gone further back, and really delved into the early, the 60s and 70s and 80s. That forced my opinion of the Brosnan movies to take a downward turn, so to speak.
Well, we'll see. Well, I'm looking forward to it myself to see because my brain it's going to need a little refreshing. Can only keep so much Bond plots up here. All right, before we go, John, I know we've been keeping you. So before we call it a night, tell us a little bit about Caffeinated Comics, what you guys have been talking about, and where we can find you.
Sure. We're very much a news site these days. There's always something happening. Even with the pandemic, when we first started, we used to have theme weeks, and we can't even do that anymore. This week, we're talking about the Hasbro Pulse Con, where they made a lot of announcements for Marvel and G.I. Joe and Star Wars. And then we get into Dune. Both Stephen and I have seen it and give our thoughts on that. And then what we'll talk about next week depends on what's going to happen this week. But you can find it anywhere you find podcasts: Stitcher, Amazon, Spotify, iTunes. We're there. I think there's over 350 episodes now.
So that's the Caffeinated Comics podcast. You can say, Alexa, play Caffeinated Comics podcast. You'll get the latest episode. That's how I catch it. I know whenever I'm on any particular episode, I give it a listen. John is very kind to have me on all the time. And a couple things to know. Yes, last week we did give away a copy of Trigger Mortis. And I will admit, it's not because the person who wrote in guessed the actual episode that Dave was drunk in. Apparently, Dave, you appear to be drunk in a lot of episodes. Or people think you're just if you're happy, it's because you've been drinking.
Okay, fair enough.
So it still stands. I don't need to come up with a new contest yet. Find the episode where Dave is noticeably happier by the end of the episode because he's been drinking. And again, I'll say he was double fisting that night. Write to us at Shaken Not Heard at gmail.com. Tell me the movie we were discussing in that episode. You get one guess. All right. Guess right. I will send you a code so you can get your own copy of Trigger Mortis by Anthony Horowitz. It's a fun book. Anthony Horowitz, who has written a couple James Bond films, James Bond books, as well as Moriarty books and Sherlock Holmes, has taken unused Ian Fleming material and incorporated it into this novel. And I tell you, it's a great title, if you ask me. The biggest problem I'm having right now in writing my own James Bond story has been coming up with a cool Bond-sounding title. Came up with one, and I'm not telling anybody because I don't want anybody stealing it, but that's it. I've come up with one, and that's it. So, if you can find that episode, what episode was it? What movie were we talking about? Write to us at shakennotheard@gmail.com. Guess correctly, and you will get a copy of Trigger Mortis for the Kindle. Also, follow us on Instagram. That's instagram.com/shakennotheard, where you can see we come up with, I come up with visual jokes and observations, and also previews of what's going to come on the next episode. Also, where I found one of our upcoming guests, I would encourage you to follow SIS Training Gear on Instagram. He has a shop where they sell replica James Bond SIS training gear, like the shirts, the workout outfits. We are going to have someone from SIS Training Gear on the show to talk about living the Bond lifestyle, as well as gifts for the Bond fan in your life come the holidays. So, unless anyone else had something they wanted to offer before you go. Thank you, Susan, for joining us. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Patty. Thank you, Lehman. We appreciate all of you who are watching on the on the Twitch channel, on YouTube, on Facebook Live. Always great to have you on board. Join us next week when we will be talking about Tomorrow Never Dies. Because when you get to tomorrow, it becomes today. Hence, it lives forever. Thanks, folks. This has been Shaken Not Heard, the James Bond fan cast. That's for your ears only. Good night, everyone.